It all started on a sunny Saturday morning when my brother Jake came running into the kitchen with that mischievous grin that always meant trouble. Jake, being the daredevil of the family, was notorious for his wild ideas, but this time he was practically bursting with excitement. "You're not going to believe this," he said, dragging me outside before I could even finish my breakfast. Standing in the driveway was his pride and joy, a towering chestnut horse named Thunder. Jake had spent months training Thunder for all kinds of stunts, and to be honest, I admired how fearless he was around animals that size. But today, the look in his eyes wasn't just about showing off Thunder's tricks. No, he had something else in mind, and I could tell I was about to get roped into one of his crazy schemes. "You trust me, right?" Jake asked, his voice dripping with that annoying confidence he always had when he was up to something. Before I could answer, he grabbed my hand and placed something cold and metal in my palm, a helmet. "Suit up," he said, grinning ear to ear. I stared at him, already feeling a pit form in my stomach. "What are we doing, Jake?" I asked, hoping it wasn't as bad as I imagined. "Well," he said, patting Thunder's side, "I've been working on something special with Thunder, and I need you to help me test it." His vague explanation didn't do much to calm my nerves, but Jake wasn't the type to take no for an answer. The next thing I knew, he was boosting me onto Thunder's back and adjusting the stirrups like this was a perfectly normal Saturday activity. Now, I should probably mention that I'm not exactly a horse person. Sure, I'd ridden a few times, but nothing beyond a slow trot. Jake, on the other hand, made it look effortless, like he and Thunder could communicate telepathically. "You'll be fine," he said, his tone way too casual for what was about to happen. "Thunder's the gentlest horse you'll ever meet." But as I sat there, clutching the reins with sweaty palms, Jake started setting up something that looked suspiciously like an obstacle course in the field. My heart sank. "Wait a second," I said, trying to dismount, but Jake was already behind me, tightening the helmet strap under my chin. "Just trust me," he said again, giving Thunder a reassuring pat. "This is going to be epic." Epic? Maybe for him. For me, it felt more like a recipe for disaster. As Jake gave Thunder a signal, the horse began to move, and I could feel my entire body tense up. "Jake, what are you doing?" I shouted, but he just smiled and waved. And that's when it happened. The moment that would turn this ordinary Saturday into a story I'd never forget. But trust me, you're not ready for what comes next. Thunder started moving faster than I expected, and I instinctively clung to the reins like my life depended on it. The sound of his hooves pounding against the ground echoed in my ears, and all I could think was, what have I gotten myself into? Jake, standing off to the side, was shouting something, but I couldn't make out the words over the rush of wind and my own racing heartbeat. As Thunder picked up speed, my mind flashed back to the last time Jake convinced me to go along with one of his ideas. That time, it was about jumping off the dock into the freezing lake in the middle of October, because according to him, it'll toughen you up. Spoiler alert, I ended up with a cold, and Jake ended up laughing at me for days. This time, though, felt different. It wasn't just a harmless prank or a silly dare. Jake had this seriousness in his voice earlier, like he genuinely believed in whatever this was. Despite my nerves, I couldn't help but admire Thunder's grace. He moved like he was in total control, weaving effortlessly through the field. It was clear Jake had spent countless hours working with him. Growing up, Jake was always obsessed with horses. While other kids were glued to video games, he was out at the stables, learning everything he could about riding, training, and even taking care of the animals. Thunder was more than just a horse to him. He was Jake's partner, his dream brought to life. But that didn't explain why Jake thought I was the right person for this. I've always been the cautious one in the family, the one who double-checks everything before taking a single step. Jake, on the other hand, thrives on chaos and adventure. Maybe he thought this would be a good way to pull me out of my comfort zone, or maybe he just needed someone gullible enough to say yes. Either way, I was starting to realize there was more to this whole thing than he let on. As Thunder rounded a corner, Jake yelled again, this time louder and more urgent. "Hold tight and trust him," he called, his voice cutting through the tension. My stomach flipped. That's when I noticed the course ahead wasn't just a few poles and cones, it was something much bigger. My hands tightened on the reins, my heart pounding harder than ever. Whatever Jake had planned, I wasn't sure I was ready for it. And then Thunder made his move. Thunder veered sharply to the left, and I barely held on, my fingers gripping the reins so tightly they ached. Ahead of us, Jake had set up what looked like a series of jumps, actual hurdles spaced out in a line across the field. My breath caught in my throat. He wanted me to jump these, on a horse I barely knew how to ride. Panic bubbled up in my chest as Thunder approached the first jump with confident strides. "Jake, are you crazy?" I shouted, my voice cracking. But Jake just stood on the sideline shouting, "You're fine, let Thunder do the work." Easy for him to say, he wasn't the one about to go flying. My instinct screamed at me to pull the reins and stop Thunder, but something about the way the horse moved held me back. There was a strange sense of trust there, like Thunder knew exactly what he was doing. The first jump came up fast, and before I had time to second guess, Thunder's powerful legs pushed off the ground. We soared over the hurdle, and for a split second it felt like time slowed down. My stomach flipped and my heart raced, but we landed smoothly, and Thunder barely broke stride. Jake's cheer rang out in the distance, but I was too overwhelmed to process it. That's when I noticed the next jump was taller, much taller. This wasn't just about testing Thunder, this was about testing me. A memory flashed in my mind of the countless times Jake pushed me to face my fears. Part of me wanted to bail, to stop and tell Jake this was too much, but the other part, the stubborn part, wanted to prove I could do it. Thunder charged forward, and as the next jump loomed closer, I realized this wasn't just about a horse or a dare. It was about trust, trust in Thunder, trust in Jake, and maybe even trust in myself. The wind whipped against my face as Thunder surged forward, his muscles rippling beneath me with every powerful stride. The taller jump was just ahead now, and my nerves felt like they were going to explode. I glanced at Jake, hoping for a signal to stop, to call this whole thing off, but he was focused on us. His face lit up with excitement and a hint of something else. Pride. He actually believed I could do this. Thunder didn't hesitate, his ears flicking forward, fully focused on the challenge. I, on the other hand, was caught between fear and adrenaline, every part of me screaming to let go and bail. But then I heard Jake's voice in my head. Trust him. Not just Thunder, but Jake too. He wouldn't have put me here if he didn't think I could handle it. At least, that's what I told myself as Thunder closed the distance to the jump. We were just feet away now. My grip tightened, and I leaned forward slightly, trying to remember everything Jake had ever told me about riding. Thunder's strides became stronger, more deliberate, and then, with a powerful push, he launched us into the air. The world tilted, and for a heart-stopping moment, it felt like we were flying. But something was wrong. As we reached the peak of the jump, I felt my balance shift. The saddle tilted slightly, and I realized I hadn't been holding my posture correctly. My heart raced as panic set in. I was slipping. The ground below seemed to stretch farther away, and for the first time I fully grasped just how high we were. Jake must have seen it too, because I heard him shout, his voice urgent this time. "Stay with him, hold on." But I wasn't sure if I could. Thunder landed with a heavy thud, his hooves digging into the ground, but I wasn't steady. My body tipped sideways, and before I could react, my foot slipped out of the stirrup. For a split second, I thought I was going to fall, but somehow I clung to the saddle, my other hand grabbing a chunk of Thunder's mane. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear Jake yelling from the sidelines, "Lean back, find your balance." Jake's voice cut through my panic, but it was easier said than done. Thunder slowed for a moment, sensing my instability, but just as I started to pull myself upright, a sudden noise ripped through the field. It was sharp, loud, and unmistakable. A crack of thunder, only there wasn't a cloud in the sky. The sound echoed, and thunder reared slightly, startled. My grip slipped further, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I was done for. Jake dropped everything and sprinted toward us, shouting, "It's okay! It's okay!" His calm but firm tone seemed to settle Thunder, who snorted and pawed at the ground, his ears flicking in agitation. My hands trembled as I clung to the saddle, trying to steady myself. "What was that?" I managed to gasp, my voice shaking. Jake didn't answer immediately. His gaze darted toward the tree line at the edge of the field, where the sound seemed to have come from. His expression shifted, a mix of confusion and something else, concern. "Stay on Thunder," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'll be right back." "Jake, wait," I called, but he was already running toward the trees. The uneasy feeling in my chest grew as Thunder shifted beneath me, still restless from the sudden noise. I scanned the field, half expecting to see something or someone emerge from the shadows. But there was nothing, just the distant rustle of leaves and the faint echo of Jake's footsteps disappearing into the woods. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, gripping the reins tightly, every nerve in my body on high alert. And then I heard it. Another sound, this time closer. It wasn't thunder or footsteps. It was a low, sharp whinny from another horse, one that didn't belong to us. The sharp whinny sent a chill down my spine. Thunder's ears flicked back, his body tense beneath me, as if he sensed something I couldn't see. I turned toward the tree line where Jake had disappeared, my heart racing. "Jake!" I shouted, my voice trembling, but there was no response. Another whinny pierced the silence, this time even closer. Then, from the shadows of the trees, a second horse emerged. It was a sleek black mare, her coat glistening in the sunlight. On her back was a figure, a man I didn't recognize. He wore a dark jacket, his face shadowed under a wide-brimmed hat. The sight of him made my stomach churn. He didn't look like he belonged here, and his sudden appearance felt anything but accidental. Thunder let out a deep snort, shifting uneasily as the man and his horse approached. "Easy, boy," I whispered, though my own voice was shaky. The man stopped just a few yards away, his horse pawing at the ground. He tilted his head, studying me for a moment before finally speaking. "Nice horse you got there," he said, his voice calm, but with an edge that made my skin crawl. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt. My mind was racing, piecing together the strange sequence of events. The mysterious noise, Jake's sudden disappearance, and now this stranger. Where was Jake? The man smirked. "Your brother has something that doesn't belong to him," he said, gesturing toward the woods. "I'd suggest you call him back." Before I could respond, a rustling sound came from the trees. Jake burst out of the brush, his face flushed, and his hands clutching something small and metallic, a silver medallion. He froze when he saw the man, his expression shifting to one of guilt and defiance. "I didn't take it," Jake said, his voice steady but tight. "I found it." The man's smirk widened. "Funny how things get found. Hand it over or your horse pays the price." He reached into his jacket, and my heart dropped as I caught a glint of something sharp. But before anything could happen, Thunder let out a deafening whinny and reared back, his powerful movements startling the man's horse. Jake took the chance to toss me the medallion. "Ride!" he shouted. Without thinking, I kicked Thunder into a gallop, clutching the medallion tightly as we sped across the field, leaving Jake and the stranger behind. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. Thunder galloped at full speed, his hooves pounding against the earth as if he understood the urgency. My heart raced, the medallion burning cold in my palm. The wind stung my face, but I didn't dare look back. Jake's voice echoed in my head. "Ride!" I had no idea what this medallion meant or why that stranger wanted it, but I knew I couldn't let him have it. Thunder carried me far from the field, the trees blurring past as we entered a narrow trail leading toward the back of the property. It wasn't until we reached the clearing near the old barn that I pulled him to a stop. My chest heaved as I struggled to catch my breath, adrenaline still coursing through me. Thunder snorted, his ears flicking back toward the distant noise of the stranger's horse. Moments later, I heard Jake crashing through the underbrush. He stumbled into the clearing, his face streaked with dirt and his shirt torn from the branches. Relief washed over me when I saw him, but it was quickly replaced by frustration. "What just happened, Jake?" I demanded, holding up the medallion. "What is this, and why is someone threatening us over it?" Jake looked at me, his usual bravado gone. "I don't know exactly," he admitted, his voice quiet. "I found it buried near the stables a few weeks ago. I thought it was just some old trinket, but I guess it's more important than I realized." "Clearly," I said, still shaken. "That man was serious, Jake. This isn't a game." Jake nodded, his expression solemn. "I'll take it to the sheriff," he said after a moment. "They'll know what to do." I hesitated, still holding the medallion. It felt heavier now, as though it carried all the tension and danger of the past hour. Finally, I handed it to him. "You better," I said firmly, "and no more secrets." Jake managed a weak smile. "No more secrets," he promised. As we walked Thunder back to the stables, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by exhaustion and a strange sense of closure. The stranger was gone, at least for now, but the memory of his words lingered. Later that evening, as I sat in my room replaying the day in my mind, I realized something had shifted. Jake and I had always been close, but this experience had pushed us to trust each other in a way we never had before. Whatever came next, I knew we'd face it together.